Hello everyone. It dawned on me that we didn't get a chance to talk about how to render a final movie out of After Effects in our last lecture. And I thought I'd put together this short video to showcase how this is done. Basically what you have in front of you is a very small composition that is set up at 1280 by 720, as you'll see from its settings. And it's fairly straightforward composition, 1280 by 720, 30 FPS, and 3 seconds long. In this composition, I have set up a title, which I have called title fade, and I have applied a preset fade up characters that runs over 2 seconds. So when I scrub my video downstream, you will notice that each character fades in a character at a time over a span of 2 seconds. This is basically the same thing we did in class when I introduced the presets inside the effects window in After Effects. Now, what I want to do with this setup is I want to render a movie of this particular composition. As I explained in class, what is being rendered is what's underneath this work area bar, the one that goes from this blue swatch to this one over here. So if I reduce this to 2 seconds, that will be the area that will be rendered. That is my work area when I tell it to export the file. Chances are is that you are working on something that is exactly the length of what you want exported. So most likely you will maintain this bar to be the length of the composition. Say for example, in our first video, I had requested that you create a 30-second presentation. That bar should be 30 seconds, and those should be the final 30 seconds that you export as a movie. Now, what I'm going to do to export this file is I am going to select the actual composition that I want to export in our project window. In this case, it's the only thing that's there, but in your case, there will be many other items in there from all the media that you've imported and things that you're using in other compositions. So you select the item that you want to export, and then you go File, Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. This option will open up a new program called Adobe Media Encoder, and the first time that you open up this program, it takes a little while. It takes quite a while actually to open up because it's a completely separate program from After Effects. The Adobe Media Encoder, it's a queue program that allows you to export and render files on the background while you continue working in After Effects. Now you notice that this added 2 of them because I had added one a minute ago just to test to make sure that everything opened up, and once you open it the first time, it should open up a lot faster the second time. So that was also the reason why I had opened it before. I only need one in the queue, so you'll notice that each one of them gets added as you go ahead and export the compositions from After Effects. So if you want to remove something from this queue, you simply select it and hit the delete key on your keyboard, and the item gets removed. Now let's, for example, remove both of them to have a clean queue. Let me close the program again, select the composition in After Effects, File, Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder, and you'll notice that it opens up a lot faster the second time around. And it takes a second for the file to get added to the queue. It will get added, and as soon as it gets added, it gives us the ability to change the settings for what will be rendered. Like I said, it will take a few seconds for it to show up in the queue because it is basically setting up the presentation, the actual composition, I'm sorry. It's taking the composition out of After Effects and it moves it into the background so that you can go back to After Effects and continue working if you need to. Now with this item selected, you'll notice that with this item that has been put into the queue, you will notice that there is some settings that match some of those items that I requested in the specs for the first movie, such as I needed you to export an H.264 file format, and I also told you the size. Now the size is something that you define when you're defining the composition in After Effects, when you create the composition. But the compression settings, the actual file format, is something that you change in this Adobe Media Encoder program. To access the area where you are encoding, you simply click either on the file compression format, or in this link here that says match source. Match source will give you the highest bit rate that this thing can output at based on whatever compression setting you have on the left hand side. If you click on that drop down, you'll see that you have many options for exporting, included some that I've been asked about during class, such as animated GIFs. Now the one that we want is H.264 because that is a universal output format, and it compares to what QuickTime used to do before. It only has better compression. H.264 is also the compression format that is used for Blu-ray. So it maintains really good quality video on the final output while providing enough compression for the video to be small in size. So we'll use H.264 out of the drop down, and then what I'll do is I'll click on the match source hyperlink. This opens up something called connecting to dynamic link server, which might take a few minutes in some instances the first time that you open it. Basically what this is doing is part of the cloud now. It's trying to connect to the way the cloud works with the whole Adobe ecosystem. And so now with this new window open, I am allowed to do several things on the right hand side regarding the settings for the actual video. You'll notice that the title is here. It allows me to pick from presets if I want to for formats, also presets for different options. If I am targeting specific devices, it allows me to target either phones, old phones like 3GPP, that used to be the old format for very small phones, Amazon Kindle, Android, and if you continue scrolling down, you'll find Apple TV, iPads, and so on. Now, what we want to do for ours is we want to maintain the settings as we created them in the composition, and what we want to do is simply reduce the size of the file. You will notice that this file right here is telling me that the estimated size of my output file is going to be 3 megabytes. That is rather small, but then again, I have very little going on the screen. I only have a title fading in, and my total animation is about 3 seconds. So that's going to be about a megabyte per second. That's basically what it comes down to. However, I have a way of compressing that even further. If I scroll down on the right hand side under the video tab, if I scroll down, I have access to something called the target bitrate. Now this target bitrate is actually, the target bitrate is the actual controller for the file size. That is basically the amount of throughput data that the video is sending to the screen as it is playing back. The more bitrate that you have, the larger a file because you are sending more information to the screen. The smaller the bitrate, the smaller the file. So you can play with the settings, and it changes for each one of the videos that you will be creating. Every video will have a different target bitrate that is optimal for what you're trying to produce. The rule of thumb is that anything higher than 10 megabytes per second, it's fairly large and will give you the best possible quality. Anything below that, between 10 and 3 megabytes, it's still decent in quality, but you start losing some of the details. Anything below 3 megabytes per second will start degrading so fast that you will start losing quality, such as you would, instead of seeing gradients, you will see basically steps of color if you're looking at gradients. What I'll do is I'll output this, I'll change the value of the target bitrate to about 3 megabytes per second in this case, and you'll notice an immediate drop on the estimated file size at the end. So from 3 megabytes it went to 1 megabyte, and it should give me a fairly decent quality video. As I'm scrubbing the video here in the preview, I'll notice that my title seems pretty clean. It does not start getting staircase on the edges, and I still see my colors in good quality. So that is good. About 3 Mbps is usually my bottom-most default. I usually just start from there, from that point, from 3 Mbps up for any projects. You can change the maximum bit rate, but it will not affect the size of your overall file. So for example, if I make that 5, you'll notice that there's no change on the actual final size. So this one really does not affect much the quality of the video itself. I can leave it at 5 and you'll notice that no change happens in my actual preview. I can go all the way down on this to 1.9, and you'll notice, you can barely notice it, but there's a little bit of quality change on the edges of the letters. And when the actual animation happens, you'll see a lot more items being degraded. So I will just go ahead and default it to 3 Mbps. And that's the only setting that I'm asking you guys to change. Make sure that when you export, you make sure that you have audio exported. Do not change any of the settings on the audio, and I'll explain why in class. Just leave them as they are. And everything else should also stay as it is. We're going to go into more detail in the next week. During the next week's class, we're going to be digging a little bit more into this particular software so that you can learn how to calculate the best possible scenario output for final movies depending on the project that you're working on. I'll click OK on this item, and then all I have to do is just click on the green arrow to render the file. You'll see the little render item go, and you'll hear a sound. That sounds like a chime. That sound indicates that the file was rendered properly and that there were no issues. If there had been any issues in your file render, you would have heard a different sound. That sounds like a goat. It would have sounded like meh, and that is literally what it sounds like. So now let's take a look at the file, see what we output. I'll click on that little link to take me to the file, and it tells me where it's at. It saved it into my temp folder. There's my title MP4, and when I play it back, the file will play as the animation title fade. 3 seconds, 1 megabyte, and fairly good quality for a 1 megabyte file. Obviously, you can tell that there is some degradation, some loss of quality when it comes to color. My color is not as rich as it was during the creation of the file, but that is sort of the trade when you're working with compressing files. You can keep on going back and forth until you find a quality that suits you best. But the more Mbps that you add, the higher, the larger the file will be at the end. So I hope this short video helps you on rendering your files, and I am looking forward to seeing your work in class. Thanks.